So in today's video, I am going to show you how to disassemble an HP 17BY0053OD laptop. So first things first, you're going to see here that this laptop was dropped and somebody decided to use some creative engineering and try to put it back together. First thing you want to do, flip the laptop over so it's upside down. And you're going to have a series of screws. So you have one screw here, one screw here, one screw here, and one screw here. These 4 screws are all the same size, so you do not have to separate them or organize them in any way. Okay, so once you have these screws out, first thing you want to do is remove your DVD drive. Just put your thumbnail in here and slide it out, just like so. There's 2 other screws underneath the DVD drive right here and right here. You got to remove those as well. As you can see, these are very different than the ones from the bottom, so you can't accidentally put those in the wrong place. Another creative piece of engineering, you won't have this problem. Okay, so before you try to pry this thing apart, there's going to be screws underneath this plastic strip. So you've got these 4 screws here, plus I think there's 2 underneath here. So all you gotta do is just dig up underneath this gently. As you can see, there's 1 screw here, and there's gonna be 1 on this end. Okay, now this particular model, not all 17BY series are like this. In this one, there is also screws on the top part of the sticky as well. And as you can see, you don't have to pull the whole sticky off, just enough to get to the screw. Now that those are out, what you want to do is flip it over back onto its bottom. At this point, the keyboard cover should easily separate from the bottom cover. So this one's a little easier because it's already broken. Just find the gap between the 2 and get your pry tool underneath there and just work your way around. Just like that. You can use pretty much any piece of plastic. You can use a credit card. You can use a guitar pick. And as you can see, it just takes a little bit of effort. Just work your way around until you have separation all the way up to the top of the keyboard. Okay, I was mistaken. HP is keeping me on my toes. So it actually turns out that there are more than just those 2 screws. So you will have to pull this completely off, set it aside, take these 2 remaining screws in the middle out. So there's 4 screws along this top. So now we got all the bottom screws out. Probably should do this first before trying to take the top cover off. But now it should lift right off. And of course, with the case damage here, it's making it a little more difficult than a normal laptop because this thing was already destroyed. So bear with me for a second. So there we go. Okay, so bottom cover has been removed. As you can see, this thing was really just destroyed. This whole corner piece was gone, so I had to replace this whole bottom cover. Now here is a little helpful tip for you. Anytime you decide to take a laptop apart, once you get it to this point, stand over it with a good quality camera. If you have a phone camera that does 1080p, it'd be perfect. Stand over it, take a picture of everything before you start removing anything else. I've done this 100 times, and believe it or not, it still helps me because sometimes you get distracted and you can't remember how exactly a cable was routed or where tape went or how things were just laid out in general. Even if you've done this 100 times, it still helps to just have a visual before shot so you can look at that picture and then just duplicate that in the reassembly process. So if you're going to replace the LCD, once you get into the guts of the machine, you're going to have 3 screw holes here. This one's the screw that comes in from the bottom cover. Then you've got these 2 here. These actually hold the LCD bracket to the machine. Once you have the hinges separated from the keyboard cover, on the left side here, you have your speakers with the, looks like this is the, probably the webcam. So you want to make sure you route the cables around this speaker, underneath the fan, like so. I'm sorry, nope, that's Wi-Fi, okay? So now we've got that freed. So I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect this Wi-Fi connection. And then on this side, you've got your video cable coming here onto the motherboard. It's also wrapping around, slightly wrapping around this other speaker. So once you kind of free that up a little bit, you can just pull this little ZIF connector up, just like that. Your video cable pops out, okay? And just like that, now your screen is free. So at this point, what we have left is our top cover, or keyboard cover is what they call. And then everything on the laptop is mounted to the bottom of this keyboard cover. The next thing we want to do is we want to remove the hard disk. Hard drive is not secured with any screws. It literally is just slid into these grooves right here. So you just want to work that out. And then of course you have your SATA cable, which you just need to simply carefully disconnect. There's your hard drive. Next you have your battery, which is secured by 4 screws. One here, one here, one here, and one here. And that simply lifts right out. The grooves on the battery here fit right onto this motherboard connection, so it literally just sets on there and screws in. The general rule when I'm replacing covers, I want to keep as much connected to the motherboard as possible. It's the less I have to do later. In this case, I have an M.2 SSD card. One screw here to remove it, and then the card just lifts up and slides right out like so. We have a USB port here with an SD card reader, so we'll have to disconnect that. It's got 2 screws right here and here. And then just flip the little ZIF connector up. This cable pulls right out. And if you needed to replace that, that would be all you'd have to do. Pop in a new one off of eBay for 10, 15 bucks. Right there, boom, 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 done. The next thing you have is your actual, this one's a little different. You have your touchpad here, which allows you to move your mouse around, but the actual left and right buttons are controlled by a separate control pad here. So it's got 2 screws, we have to remove those. So now that pad is free, and as you can see, it slides right up underneath these little brackets. These little notches right here, it's notched already. It just slides in, screws down, okay? So we'll just lay that there. If you need to remove your memory stick, 2 banana clips right here, slide those outwards, memory slides right out. But I don't need to remove the memory. Again, here's your Wi-Fi adapter here, which looks like it connects to the case with 1 screw, so I have to remove it. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pull it out. You also have your data port for your DVD drive. That's where the drive plugs in. So it's got 2 screws here. We're gonna remove those. And then this lifts off the keyboard cover, but I'm gonna leave the connections onto the motherboard. Again, we're not trying to disconnect anything that we don't have to. But if you needed to replace speakers, for example, these right here run underneath the fan. So to get the fan off, you would have to take this screw right here and then this screw right here. This fan and this whole cooling assembly would lift off the motherboard, and then the motherboard has one screw here and one screw here, another right here, and another right here. So we're going to take the motherboard out. There's one. There's motherboard screw number 2. Then you've got your heavy duty screw. Let me go ahead and take the fan screws off. Now, there we go. So as you can see, the fan is easily removable. And you can see here how the speakers are wired and run up underneath and through these notches here. Okay, so now that speaker's free. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and remove this main cable here. Just grab it, pull it right out. That's for your DC jack right here. As you can see, that little piece just lifts right out. And we've also got the connection for the touchpad here. So I'm just gonna push up on this little ZIF connector, and that frees up this cable, which is tied down. It's taped down, so you want to kind of get that up like that. It just pulls right out. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this cable as well. Same thing with the little ZIF connector. Just slides up, and then you just pull it right out. That frees up this whole touchpad assembly. Okay, and we've got one other motherboard screw right over here in the corner, right by the DC jack. Okay. And just for simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and take the cooling fan off the motherboard, just because it's kind of in the way. 4 little screws and it comes right off. Okay, just like so. Now I don't want to leave it off too long because this thermal paste will dry out, and as you can see here, this is what helps keep your processor cool. So I'm only going to leave that off long enough to get the motherboard out. I'm going to go ahead and just disconnect this fan because it's bulky and it's in my way. Just pull that out. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the speaker too, because the speaker's giving me some grief. Okay, oh, here we go. There's the hidden screw right there next to the memory chip. That's why the motherboard's not coming out. So go ahead and get that one. So that side's coming up. I'm still getting some resistance over here, which tells me I'm probably missing another screw. Ah, right here. It's a black screw and a black piece of plastic. Of course I missed that. And now the motherboard lifts completely out. Free and clear, ready to put into the new case. Now, while I do this, I'm gonna go ahead and take my cooling fan and I'm just gonna set that back here on top. I'm just gonna go ahead and put 2 screws back in here to hold it in place. Now, of course, we have our speakers. One side came out really easy. This side, there we go. Just pries out like that. There are your speakers. Everything has been disassembled at this point, all the way down to the bare bones. I actually had to replace the top cover and swap the keyboard and the mouse pad, which was an absolute nightmare. So if you have the opportunity to do this, buy this as one complete piece instead of just the plastic. It is not fun. There's all kinds of little tabs to deal with, and I had to do some hot glue just to keep it in place. And trust me, just buy the whole piece. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's so much easier. So if you've enjoyed the video thus far, make sure you click on that like button, show me some support. Subscribe to my channel, that would help me out a lot. And if you want to watch the reassembly, we're going to do that right now. So I've got the original motherboard. I'm going to put that back in place and start reconnecting everything. So I've got it set back down onto its brackets. And now we're just going to start putting it all back together. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the touchpad sensor back here in its groove and screw it back in. I've got everything in place, but before I secure the motherboard, it's very important that I run the speakers first, because they're going to run here up underneath the CPU fan, and if I put the fan in first, then I'll have to undo all that. So I'm going to set this, I'm going to kind of slide the speaker wire underneath the board and slide the actual speaker back into its slot right here, and then just run the wire underneath the board. Okay, so now the speaker is back in place, and I'm gonna go ahead and reconnect it, pop it right back in. I'm gonna go ahead and set the other speaker into its housing right here. And as you can see now, that frees me up to put the cooling fan back in. Just 2 screws here. The longer screw goes here on the right side into the motherboard, and then the shorter black screw goes in over here into the actual frame of the top cover. So I've got that set. Now I'm going to go ahead and plug the fan back in. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reconnect the DC jack. I'll go ahead and plug it in, snap it in, run the cables. Of course, you want to make sure the cable is clear of this screw hole right here, because you're going to need that when you put the top cover back on. Okay, next up, I am going to reconnect the mouse pad with this cable from the motherboard. Just flip this little connector up. Make sure this blue tab here is on the top. You can kind of use that as a guide to slide it in. And once you have it slid in, just snap this connector back down to hold it in place. Use the tape that it came with and tape it back down on top of the touchpad. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect my keyboard cable here. Just the same thing with another ZIF connector. Just lift it up, slide it in, snap it down. Make sure you keep clear of these screw holes where the board is actually going to mount. It's pretty important. Okay, the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to mount the touchpad button circuit board right here on top of the touchpad buttons. So this one gets a little tricky, because when you feed them into the grooves here, it pops the board up a little bit and it doesn't want to go into these screw holes. So you have to push down a little bit on this end to try to level it out, and then you should be able to get the screw in. Okay, so I want to put the battery back in. And I've got 4 screws, one right here. One right here. One right here. And the last one right here. I want to take the USB SD card reader and put it back in place. And I want to do that because the cable that goes to it, the hard drive is going to sit on top of it. So this has got to go first. And this is just held in place with 2 screws. Okay, once that's in place, you want to take the cable and just pop open this ZIF connector here. Just take the cable, make sure it's stretched out as far as you can stretch it. Take that cable, slide it into the ZIF connector, snap it down, and then sticky tape it back. Now you can put your hard drive back. Hard drive is in the original enclosure. Line up the data connector. You got these knobs on the end of the drive. They have to go down inside of here first, so it's going to go that way. So you slide it in at an angle. And then once they're underneath, then you can literally pop the drive right back into place. I'm going to put the Optane memory stick back in place and screw it down. The next step is to secure the connector for the DVD drive, and that's going to go right there. Now once I have that in place, I'm going to go ahead and just slide my DVD drive in to make sure that it fits okay, and it does. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove it because I'm going to put that in last. Next thing is my Wi-Fi adapter, and then screw it down. Now I don't have the cables to connect to it yet because that's part of that back assembly that are connected to the LCD, which we're going to tackle here in just 2 seconds. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the screen flat. I'm going to slide this on top of it, and then that will allow me to tilt these into place so that I can then screw everything in. That is in place. Now I'm going to connect the video cable into the ZIF connector, just like that. Slide it down and then run the cable along here. I may actually have to run it underneath here, so I'm going to remove these screws. I'm going to tilt this back up so I can run the cable underneath here. Looks like it's going to go here and route around that screw hole. Gotta be very careful to make sure you leave that screw hole open, because if you put a screw down through there, you're going to short out your entire video cable. And that should give you enough room to reach the connector, input, pop it in. So what you want to do, kind of want to work it with your fingers. Now you can see the cable is wrapped around the bracket, around the connector here for the DC jack, around here and into the video port. Now you can safely screw it back together without any danger of damaging the cable. And then put your screws back in to tighten it down. And there you go. Now repeat on the other side. But as you can see here, you've got a little groove, a channel here for your connectors, for your Wi-Fi. So you want to make sure that it runs inside this channel. I'm going to take advantage of the grooves that are in your speaker here and just run your cable along them. And you want to make sure that you get those tucked away good, because you don't want that DVD drive pinching this Wi-Fi cable when you slide the drive in and out. You'd have DVD but no Wi-Fi. So just run it along these little grooves, feed it up and over like so. And if you did it right, it should be just long enough to reach the Wi-Fi adapter here. I always find it easier to take a pair of needle nose pliers to hold this in put that on. So you've got your cable properly fed through here. The cable is now out of the way. I'm going to put the top cover back on. I'm going to put my corner screws in. That'll bring everything together nice and tight. All I'm looking to do at this point is just put the case back together where it stays together so that I can fire it up, make sure everything works properly before putting all the rest of the screws in.